Bitter Victory by Walter Miller, Jr., the author of one of the most beloved science fiction novels of the last century, A Canticle for Leibowitz. This story was only ever published in the March 1952 issue of Worlds of If magazine. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. Bitter Victory. He prowled the city's streets by night, watching the crowds with eyes of gray steel, waiting for Klia's probing thoughts to touch some unwary Terran. Sooner or later, she would have to betray herself to him if she meant to pursue her goal, and then he would kill her and go. This was his task, set for him by the director of the Phoenician Quarantine Commission. He had been here 6 months, and thus far the only evidence of her presence was a series of articles in a technical journal written by a certain Willa E. Fogarty, M.S. The author had access to information possessed by no Terran scientist. The information was presented tidbit style, almost humorously, and as pure speculation rather than as fact, but it was obviously calculated to steer the minds of readers towards certain doors that Klia wanted open. Klia's mental formative patterns were those of the paranoid, but having matured in a society where such patterns were the norm, she was neither insane nor neurotic. Her mind was keen, and her goals were those of the predator. San Rorik had to find and kill her quickly. He watched the streets by night because her race and his were both non-sleepers. They were capable of resting a part of the brain at a time, having 2 cortical areas for each bodily function. He knew she would become bored by nighttime inactivity. Sooner or later, she would come wandering while most of the city slept. In what guise would he find her? Her normal racial appearance did not conform to Terran standards. She was tall, willowy, nearly albino, with pink-gray eyes, slightly slanted and with rich red hair that swept upward in a natural tufted appearance. But hair and skin could be dyed, and over a period of several weeks she could control her circulatory and glandular systems in such a way that fatty deposits would appear where she desired them and disappear in other places, so that she could change her features and her form at will, as he himself had done. Of one thing he was certain: her paranoid pride would not permit her to assume a guise regarded as ugly by this world. Most certainly she would make herself strikingly beautiful. San Rorik, however, had reduced his body weight, padded his cheekbones to give himself a gaunt appearance, dyed his hair black, and his skin a sallow shade. An irritant rubbed into pinpricks on his face resulted in mild acne that made him something less than handsome. He smeared his teeth with brown stain, wore shabby second-hand clothing, and a pair of plain-rimmed glasses. He was not here to attract attention. He was here to kill. He looked like a peddler or a laborer out of a job. He was walking down a side street at midnight when he caught the first faint aura of her presence. She was somewhere within a few blocks, and she was planting a suggestion in the mind of the Terran who would not recognize the source of the thoughts as stemming from outside his own consciousness. Swoo-woo, that dame on the corner. Did she look at me? Think I'll walk that way. This was it. San had not reached out to touch the Terran's mind, for in doing so he would broadcast his own thought aura and reveal his presence to Klia. He had merely listened to Klia's planting of the thought in the Terran's mind, and he caught the general direction from whence it came. He began walking rapidly up the street, then cut through the blackness of an alley. Was she playing games, or had she chosen a Terran to be of some service to her? Perhaps she was bored and only wanted a brief love affair. At the end of the alley, he paused to peer toward both intersections. There were a few people on the sidewalk, but no woman tall enough to be Klia. He jaywalked and darted down the next alleyway. If the Terran had responded immediately to her suggestion, they would perhaps be gone before he could reach them. But then he caught another brief flash of thought, not words, but an image. She was helping the Terran imagine what she might look like without clothing. San chuckled as he trotted ahead. Unknowingly, she had given him a clue as to her appearance. Through glandular control, she had apparently padded herself to a remarkable condition of mammalian grandiloquence. The effect was almost surrealistic, the way a male might design a female if he had any choice in the matter. "You liked that, eh?" snarled a quiet voice from the darkness of a doorway. He stopped abruptly in mid-alley, caught in a puddle of moonlight. She had tricked him. There had been no Terran. The phony suggestion had been a trap. He glanced quickly around. "Don't move," she snapped. "I've got a native gun on you. A projectile weapon in case you aren't familiar with their artifacts." He stood in stony silence, staring at the doorway until he made out her faint shadow. There was a tiny venom gun strapped to his wrist, but its action would not be immediate, and if he used it, she would have ample time to kill him before she died. If it came to that, he would use it, but now he hesitated, trying to piece together her immediate intentions. He shrugged and grinned. "Okay, so I lost. Shoot and get it over with." "Not here. They'd run an autopsy on you, Pastoral. They'd figure you weren't quite Terran." "I'm no Pastoral. I'm an inventive." "It's all the same to me, Rorik. You're a lousy thirder. Now move. Stay in the moonlight and walk slow. Stop when you come to the street. I'll be right behind you." "Where are we going?" "Shut up! And don't start making suggestions at a policeman or I'll kill you." Rorik started walking. He felt her thoughts scanning lightly through various regions of consciousness patterns until she found a taxi driver. Then, "I got a hunch there's a customer on the next street. Think I'll turn right." The taxi was approaching the alley entrance as they emerged. "Flag it," she ordered. Rorik obeyed, grim-lipped. "You get in first, darling," she said in a pleasant tone. "I like to sit on the right." "That's just because I'm right-handed, dear," he purred acidly. "Where to, sir?" "Out of the city," the girl ordered Rorik wordlessly. "Tell him." "Ask her. She's boss." The gun jabbed him ruthlessly in the ribs. The driver grinned. "Where to, lady?" She hesitated. "A long trip?" "How long?" "Oh, 30, 40 miles, north." "It'll cost you." "That's all right. Will $20 do it?" "Maybe. Watch the meter and double it. You'll have to pay both ways." "Let's go." Rorik glanced at her sourly as they moved through the traffic. She had been exaggerating only slightly with the mental image used to trap him. The platinum blonde hair, the gray eyes, the aristocratic features, the full, slightly cynical mouth. She conformed perfectly to the beauty standards of this world. The black dress revealed things that would have won her first place in any of the inane native female contests. "You've done well by yourself, I see," he said, eyeing the expensive clothing and jewelry. "What telepath couldn't? And stop talking aloud." He watched her for a moment. The gun was in her handbag, so was her hand, and she was keeping a sharp eye on him. Rorik frowned. No opening yet. "Where are we going?" "Some place where you can dig a hole without being seen." Rorik stared ahead at the traffic for a moment. He didn't need to ask her what the hole was for. The driver was approaching an intersection, and the light was just changing from green to red. Having heard the girl summon the taxi, Rorik knew the man's consciousness pattern. He adjusted to it quickly and planted a rapid suggestion. "Damn the light! I can make it!" The girl cursed and lifted the handbag. The light was already red. A car shot out from the other street. The brakes screamed. A police whistle shrilled angrily. "Shoot!" Rorik dared, smirking at Klia. The handbag hesitated. "Make a wrong move and I'll have to." The driver was too busy with his own troubles to hear them. The cop came stalking across the pavement. "You like to live dangerously, huh?" he said in a bored voice. The cabbie began a plaintive explanation. "Come on, dear," said Klia. "We'll catch another cab. I like this one. Get out, or I'll kill you and the cop, too. Pay the driver." Rorik handed the driver $1. They crossed to the sidewalk, and the girl looked shaken. This was a busier street, and there were more pedestrians. He grinned at her again. "May I buy you a drink before you finish me off?" Surprisingly, she replied, "I'll let you live that long, Pastoral. It's interesting to watch you try to wiggle out of it." He knew she meant it. She could have hypnotized the cop and the driver, shot him in the cab, and strolled calmly away as one of a dozen multiple mental images. She could still do it, but evidently the idea of making him dig his own grave appealed to her icy sense of humor. They entered a small bar, and she directed him toward a secluded booth. "I'm surprised you haven't used your wrist weapon yet," she said as they sipped a martini. "Apparently you pastorals have no capability for self-sacrifice." His face showed no surprise, but he rested his arm across the table. He smirked. "I was waiting for a better opportunity, but since you put it that way, let's get it over with." His other hand darted toward the lethal wrist. "One moment," she said. He paused. "Do you have an extra projectile?" He frowned, then nodded. She smiled again and laid a braceleted white arm across the table. "I'll save you the trouble of firing. Prick me with it." His throat started with surprise. "You're not immune," he hissed. "To a yo-yo venom? Try me." Rorik gained new admiration for her. The process of immunization was an excruciatingly painful treatment, covering 3 years, and usually it shortened the lifespan considerably. This could mean but one thing. "You've been plotting for this for a long time, then?" Her eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward. "Correct, Pastoral. Ever since you excluded us from your society and sent us to an ironless planet." "I'm not a pastoral," he protested. "I'm an inventive. An artificial category. An inventive is a maladjusted pastoral who wishes he were a Klid." Her use of the ancient feudal name for her race startled him. His people had almost forgotten it. Once on New Phoenicius IV, there had been the Klids, or barons, the Algun, or serfs, and the Taknon, or artisans. The feudal system had lasted more than 5,000 years, and because of natural selection operating within the occupational groups, the 3 classes had become genetically distinct. After the rise of a technology, the Klids were overthrown and exiled to the ironless 4th planet, where they formed their own ruthless social order under a strict space quarantine enforced by the Taknon Space Force, which Rorik served. "I'll stop arguing heredity with you, Klia," he said. "Finish your drink and let's go." "I'll call the signals." "I love your Terran idiom," he grunted. "And your company is charming, but get your business over with." "You're anxious to die?" He shrugged indifferently. "Someone else will come and kill you if I don't do the job. They know you're here now." A smile. "You underestimate these people, Rorik." She waved a casual hand toward the rest of the room. "Before another yokel like you can find me, I'll have these primitives building a 5-space drive and proving that New Phoenicius has habitable planets. Then let's see you stop us." He nodded thoughtfully. "So, that's the picture. You get Terra to send ships to your world, expecting no human life there. The ships come back to Terra full of your people, ready to take over. Then you get your hands on Terran iron and steel to use in attacking my people. In general, yes. Her gray eyes were icy calm, and she hated him with a fierceness that he could feel, hated him as a symbol of the race who had exiled her people. "You're pathetic," he said quietly. She flushed, then her face went hard. He bored in. "I have always felt intensely sorry for your asinine emotion patterns." No Clid could endure that. She turned white and hissed a curse in her native tongue. He locked a probe in her consciousness, and when she squeezed the trigger of her gun, he was on his feet, heaving the table onto her lap. It crashed down as the gun exploded. The bullet tore his calf. He lashed out with a heavy fist, hard to hit her temple, and hoping it was brutal enough to kill her, she sagged and toppled to the floor. The lounge was in an uproar, the people cringing toward the walls. The police whistle made an ear-shocking screech as the traffic cop from the corner came lumbering in to investigate. "Don't anyone move!" he bellowed, and charged across the room toward Rorik, who was about to kick Klia's temple to ensure her death. His foot froze and settled to the floor. "Call an ambulance!" the cop bawled at the manager. "Everybody stay back!" Rorik began. "It was purely an—" "Don't say anything. Just stand there and keep your hands in sight." Rorik kept his hands in sight. He stared at the cop, suggesting nausea, suggesting a fluttering of the heart, suggesting asphyxiation. The cop began to gasp and reel. Rorik increased the mental dosage. The cop choked and fainted. As Rorik walked calmly out into the night, he heard voices behind him telling that the girl was dead. He felt sick himself now. There was something compelling about Klia, something that attracted. He felt a little like a child drawn toward a cruel mother, or a husband lured to a wantonly selfish and unfaithful mistress. He knew she had to be killed, yet now that it was done, he felt rotten inside. At last he found a doctor and had his flesh wound dressed. He stared at the doctor peculiarly, and the medic seemed to forget it had been a bullet wound. Rorik went home to his apartment, packed his belongings, and called a cab. An hour later, he was aboard a flight for San Francisco. There was no returning to his home planet, for he had ditched the ship at sea lest it be found by Terrans. Such were the quarantine regulations. He felt certain that Klia had done the same with her stolen Hydrian ship for another reason, lest it be found by a commission agent such as himself. Also, her plan for leading Terrans spaceward, luring them to Phoenicius IV, and taking their ships required that they continue in their naive belief that Terra possessed the only human life in the galaxy. So he was stuck here for life unless a Tacnon ship came to pick him up, and there had been no guarantee of that from the Commission. Secret landings on non-space-going planets were forbidden, except in several specifically defined emergencies. Rescuing a second-class agent was not one of them. He was faced with a life of ease, but of loneliness. A telepath would have no difficulty acquiring tremendous wealth here, but a telepath would have no company, unless he could find a few natives whose neural associative circuits were so ordered as to make telepathy latently possible. Occasionally, he had encountered a Terran whose thought aura was vaguely perceptible. Perhaps, through long and patient hypnotic conditioning, their latent abilities could be brought forth. If the genetic hodgepodge could be straightened out, Terran had high possibilities. Their basic genetic emotion patterns were not as sharply divided into groups as those of New Phoenicius, but the patterns were present, and the conflict among them was present. Rather than calling them pastorals, inventives, and imperials, as in the Phoenician case, he decided perhaps that the basic Terran patterns could best be described by the goals they were inclined to favor. The security seekers, the knowledge seekers, and the glory seekers, perhaps. Phoenician code forbade any tampering with non-threat cultural forms, but who was there to enforce it? And, in a sense, This was his planet now. Marooned here, he could participate in a subtle way and help a few local inventives find new directions. Maybe he owed them that much for killing Klia, who would certainly have steered them spaceward, although the end result would have been disastrous for them had her plan worked. The first week in San Francisco, he spent replenishing his funds through poker games, wrestling matches, and various forms of betting in which thought projective powers were a distinct advantage. Then he rented a house in the suburbs, ordered half a ton of various electronic parts, and began building several computer units while he concentrated on revising his physical appearance to a more pleasing form. As the weeks passed, he put on weight, removed the fatty tissue from his cheekbones, thickened his cheeks enough to remove the gauntness, and restored his complexion to a healthier hue. When he was finished, he had the appearance of a gregarious young businessman, cleanly attractive but not offensively handsome. He finished the computer shortly after he finished himself. It was not a large unit as computers went. It was built into a chassis the size of an 8-foot refrigerator. A Terran might say it was constructed to handle problems in that rarefied strata of mathematics known as the von Neumann theory of games, but the 24 instruments on its face were calibrated in points per share. Rorik spent a month in libraries photographing stock market reports covering a 30-year period. These he laboriously studied, plotting the rise and fall of each stock on graphs, writing empirical equations to describe each graph, and feeding the equations to the computer's memory tanks. Fed also into the tanks were 30-year record equations describing tax rates, population growth, national income, government expenditures, world armaments, exports, imports, and average individual incomes. The computer, required to assume that all the variables were dependent upon one another, evolved an implicit function in some 37 variable quantities. He then fed it the present conditions and required it to extrapolate the values forward over a period of 2 months. 11 stocks appeared due for sharp rises within the period. San Rorik invested $10,000. At the end of 2 months, the stocks had risen 15,000. He corrected the small errors in the computer's estimates by supplying new data, then extrapolated again, selling and reinvesting in accordance with the new predictions. There was danger, of course, that a completely unpredictable series of events might occur to cause unfavorable market fluctuations. Therefore, he very carefully watched world conditions, political developments, and technical advancements. Klia's articles were still appearing in magazines and technical journals, but that was not surprising, considering the usual lag between the acceptance of an essay and its publication. And the pieces were having subtle repercussions in the news, attracting no attention in themselves, but spurring certain scientists to think along new lines. Klia had suggested a method for testing basic mental formative patterns in infancy, and now a Western university's psychology department was setting up a research lab, quote, for studying the basic affective reaction patterns of infants at birth, end quote. Klia, under another pen name, had suggested an extension of relativistic mechanics to cover hypothetical n-dimensional universes. The newspapers announced now that the famous mathematician, Larwich, was beginning work on the creation of a mathematical physics with no basic assumptions other than those of elementary arithmetic. "Man's only insight into reality," said Larwich, "derives from his ability to count on his fingers. All else is purely experiential approximation." Rorik grinned. Klia had been trying to steer Terran inventors straight toward a 5-space interstellar drive, while the government was still spending billions on rocket research in the hope of reaching the moon. She was trying to get the mathematicians to see the velocity of light as a constant only at one specific universe level of 5 space, and as a different constant at other levels. and she had managed to steer Larwich in the right direction. Only one thing was lacking: an experiential tie between observable reality and the theory Larwich would certainly develop. Without it, the theory would remain merely abstruse mathematical speculation of an invariant nature. Rorick's fingers itched at the typewriter, longing to supply the missing suggestion. A guilt reaction, he told himself, probably associated with Klia's death. Nevertheless, he wrote an essay entitled Origin of Interstellar Hydrogen and sent it to a university press periodical. The article suggested that the spontaneous appearance of matter in the four-space cosmos could be explained in terms of a five-space continuum with a circulation of matter along the fifth component. The essay was rejected with a brief note from the editor. "Sorry, but we just last week purchased an essay dealing with the mechanics of this continuous creation notion. Your style is good. Try us again soon. Editor." Rorick snorted and chucked the essay in the wastebasket. Some local yokel had probably beat him to the draw with some weirdly empirical notion that left out the tie with five space. The rejection irritated him. He decided to give it up for a while and concentrate on making himself a millionaire. Then he learned that Dr. Larwich was in San Francisco for the summer. After some debate about the desirability of direct intervention, he found the professor's address, a modest cottage overlooking the bay with a short stretch of narrow beach before it. Rorick rented a cottage half a mile away. 3 days later, he wandered past the professor's cottage, having spied 3 brown bodies sunbathing on the beach before it. As he drew nearer, he studied them curiously. An elderly couple and a girl in her late 20s, possibly Larwich's daughter. She was watching him casually, a large, dark girl with hazel eyes and firm breasts. Rorick approached the group. "Am I still on a public beach?" he asked. "Or am I a trespasser?" The elderly couple glanced up questioningly. The girl smiled. "Trespassers are welcome. Help yourself." She had a nice musical voice. "I've got the next cottage down the line," he said, "but I scarcely realized I had neighbors." "It is lonely out here. Won't you sit with us a while? You look tired." Rorick grinned and patted a slight bulge in his midsection. "Trying to work off my bay window." He strolled toward them, scraping his feet in the sand. The old man looked down at his own sagging belly, then glowered at the stranger. "Young man, you have just committed a grievous faux pas," he grunted. "I'm Edith Larwich," said the girl. "This is my father, Frank Larwich, and my mother, Louise." He nodded and sat down. "I'm Sam Rory." He hesitated, looking at the professor and gathering a frown. "Larwich, Frank Larwich. I've heard of you, I think. Is it Dr. Larwich, of the new look in invariant viewpoints?" The old man looked surprised. He lifted his eyebrows first at his wife, then his daughter. He extended his hand to Rorick and looked a beam of amusement down his slender nose. "Young man, you have just absolved yourself of that faux pas. What school are you with?" "No school." "What research lab, then?" "No lab. I'm a gambler." "Bah! Stop joking. Laymen don't talk about invariance or remember the names of old codgers like me." He shrugged. "I apologize for being a layman, sir, but I like mathematics. I've read a few of your pieces in the digest." Larwich glanced at his wife and daughter again. They were looking curiously at Rorick. "My fame comes as a distinct shock to me," the old man said with a slight smile. "Have a cup of iced tea," said Edith, pouring from a thermos. He thanked her and managed to pull his eyes away from her body. Terran standards of beauty were beginning to appeal to him. "When do you expect to publish your new theory, Doctor?" he asked casually. "Make it frank," grunted the oldster. and I expect to publish it within a few months. It's coming along much faster than I thought. In fact, it scares me sometimes." Rorik fell briefly thoughtful. Any man could work that theory out in a few months was certainly the mental equal of the best minds of his own race. It startled him. Here seemed proof enough that Terran humanity was going places, given a little intelligent biosocial reform. "That's remarkable," he murmured. "I thought it would be at least 2 years." "So did I, but Edith here helped me tremendously with certain down-to-earth suggestions. It may seem unbelievable to you, but I think this thing is going to have some practical applications and apply to certain observable phenomena." Rorik looked sharply at the girl. She was smiling at him faintly with the cool green eyes. The old man laughed. "Edith forgot to mention, it's Edith Larwich, Ph.D. in physics. She instantly spotted some possible correlations between my theory and some of the modern cosmologies." Rorik was still staring at her. "Such as the mechanics of spontaneous creation of matter?" he asked quietly. The girl nodded and smiled amusement at her father, who appeared taken aback. "If Sam Rory is really a gambler, let's not invite him to any poker games." She grinned at the visitor again. "This is remarkable. We'll have to get better acquainted." He murmured pleasantly, but felt a vague uneasiness. He had come to plant a hint of the correlation in the mathematician's mind, but now there was no need to do so. When Larwich was through, physicists could build an experimental 5-space generator on the basis of his theory. When the physicists were through making data tables, engineers would be able to construct a working model interstellar drive, provided someone would make the investment. Rorik, busy making a fortune in the stock market, musingly saw himself as an angel for the first ship. Edith stood up, tugging at her suit to cover a streak of white hip. She smiled down at him. "Think I'll swim. Care to join me?" "Leave him here a while, will you?" grunted Larwich. Rorik nodded at the girl. "I'll meet you at the water." She trotted toward the surf, lithe, brown, and lovely in the sun. "Your daughter is very beautiful, sir," Rorik murmured. "Eh? Oh, thank you. I find myself marveling about her change so much that I scarcely notice her prettiness." "Change?" "In personality. You see, she was nearly blind until a few months ago. Cataracts, and she was always so retiring, quiet, and introspective. It's remarkable what the removal of a physical defect can do for a girl's personality. You wouldn't call her shy and retiring now, would you?" "Not at all. Quite friendly, I'd say." Rorik watched her plunging gracefully in the surf, and he wondered at his vague uneasiness. "What do you really do, Sam?" Larwich asked. "Investor. I hit it lucky on the market." "Gambler. Same thing." Larwich chuckled. "You evidently read technical publications as a hobby, then. Or are you working on a mathematical way to beat the stock market?" Rorik smiled enigmatically and got to his feet. "You might try the von Neumann theory of games," he offered, then smiled sheepishly. "If you'll excuse me, I think I'll join your daughter for a swim." She was far out beyond the feeble breakers when he trotted through the shallow water, but she rolled on her back to wave and watch him. A very beautiful, intelligent girl, he thought calculatingly. If he were to remain marooned on Terra, it would be interesting to see if normal procreation could result from marriage with a native. He felt an urge to touch the girl's mind, then decided against it for the present. Some Terrans seemed sensitively receptive, and they became startled by undue power. She lay treading water until he swam up beside her. Then she smiled, but her eyes were thoughtful. "Water's nice," he grunted. "Is it?" He frowned. Why the challenging tone? Who are you, anyway? Just who I said I was. Sam Rory, gambler, investor. She said nothing more about it, but her eyes were suspicious. They swam in silence for a time, then she called, "How's the beach down at your place?" He hesitated. Was she angling? "Just fine," he said. "Why don't you come down?" She lifted her wet head from the tide and nodded soberly. "I will, very soon." Again he felt the vague uneasiness. Rorik spent the afternoon on his porch, watching the bay. Tomorrow he meant to go back to the suburbs, return to the task of making himself the wealthiest man in the country as quickly as possible, then start endowing universities with research grants like a fat old capitalist with a guilty conscience. Twilight came, and he felt the loneliness of an alien longing for home. He visualized the warm, rolling hills of Phoenicius III, dotted with pastoral Algoon villages, and the great walled city-states of the Tacnon, covering hundreds of square miles and set in the midst of the Algoon landscape. They worked in harmony, the two races, each maintaining its own government, each keeping itself socially and biologically separated, yet each realizing that one could not exist and prosper without the other. It was a class society that worked because the classes were divided according to the goals they sought, not according to any artificial framework. Of course, man's goals were chosen in the light of his emotions and aptitudes, and at least among the Phoenicians, emotion and aptitude patterns were founded on genetic bedrock. It was only rarely that Tacnon aptitudes were born in an Algoon village, and equally rare when a pastorally inclined child appeared in the Tacnon cities. Loneliness weighed heavily on him. With some misgivings, he closed his eyes and searched through the transor regions for the Larwich girl's pattern of consciousness. When he passed through it, he started up with a low gasp and lost the pattern. There had been a knife-edge sharpness about it, a clarity of focus that suggested resonant neural circuits, as in the trained telepath. He groped for it again. But when he found it, the sharpness was gone, if it had really been there. The transor was strong but blurred, unreadable. He decided his first impression had been illusion. "I wonder what that young man is doing," he suggested. "He did invite me to his beach. Maybe if I walked down that way." He paused a moment, trying to catch the blurred images that swam in leisure through her consciousness, but they were too muddled. He withdrew from her and waited. Half a mile might be too far for the untrained mind to catch the faint suggestion, and even though she would mistake the thoughts for her own, she might offer herself some counter-excuse for not coming. He watched the cottage in the failing gray of twilight. After a few minutes, the screen door opened and someone stood on the porch. Then she trotted down the steps to the beach and came walking his way, but looking toward the sea. As she drew nearer, he saw that she was wearing white shorts and a pale blue blouse with the tail knotted about her waist. The wind whipped the blouse against her breasts and ruffled her short dark hair like a nest of feathers. He watched her come toward him with narrow, speculative eyes, and he wondered again, was a procreative union possible here? She looked toward him and waved, breaking his reverie, then, on apparently sudden impulse, turned and plodded through the sand toward his porch. "Am I trespassing, or did you invite me to your beach?" "Come on up," he called. "I was just wishing you'd drop by." She hooked her foot on the step and cocked her head at him. "Why?" It startled him. "The answer to that," he chuckled, "might be found in textbooks of psychology and biology, particularly the latter. Come up and sit down. Not if you're going to be biological, only introspectively so. I have insufficient data on the subject to feel safe in rash experiments." She laughed and came up to take a chair, propping her long, trim legs on the rail. The subject is a carnivore who might chew off an ear. How about a nice thick steak with onions and French fries and a gallon of beer? The bloated subject would fall asleep in her cage. Exactly. She watched him with cool amusement in the dusk. I think we find each other attractive. I'm glad it's mutual. I have plans for you. She dropped her legs, rested her elbows on her knees, and swung half around to grin peculiarly, head cocked up at him. Okay, Sam, finish the funny story. He leaned toward her and tried to steal as softly as possible into her consciousness pattern, but he kept his voice light and casual. The plan is simple biology, but involves many unknowns as yet. For instance, he pulled her face toward him slowly and molded her mouth with his. Quietly, they slipped to their feet, locked tightly together, laughing quietly with soft fire where their faces touched. He brought his mind slowly into full resonance with her pattern, demanding her to respond. The response was white flame, but not of the body. His mind reeled for an instant before he understood. Full focus, too bright, and something hard against his ribs. You should have been born a Klid. He backed away, staring at her, and the glint of metal in her hand. I wasn't certain, she went on, until you threw that full resonance at me. Klia! Yes? She found a cigarette with her left hand and lit it while she held the gun on him with her right. He could see her face in the match flare, and it appeared tight and drawn. Your lipstick is smeared, he offered. Thanks. It was a pleasure. I'm really sorry I have to kill you. Like you killed Larwich's blind daughter and took her place? Klia snorted. She's not dead. She's still blind, and she's an amnesiac in a Pennsylvania psychopathic ward. Hypnotically induced amnesia, undoubtedly. Right. I had to get her personality patterns and leave her a blank. I thought I left you dead on the floor. She sighed impatiently. Would a Terran know when a Phoenician was dead? Rorik saw his blunder and gritted his teeth. He'd been a fool to believe. Naturally, every time someone touched her wrist to test her pulse, she had simply stopped her heartbeat until the fellow let go, or perhaps shut off the circulation in the arm. Well, you've got Larwich well on the road to the theory of a space drive, I see. She nodded, started to reply, paused, then, You didn't suspect me because you thought I was dead. Then why did you come prowling around Larwich? To do what you've already done. You're lying. See for yourself. He began sliding into resonance with her, but she backed away warily and blocked him out. You can break it whenever you want to, he said. She risked it, and their transors found sharp focus again. He reeled off the contents of his associative circuits relating to Larwich and his theory, reeled them off too rapidly for them to be inventions of the moment. Then he switched to memories concerning his thoughts of her. Why did you do that? She muttered when he was through. Her voice was shaky, and the gun seemed to be sagging in her hand. He shrugged. We're a long way from New Phoenicius. I expect to be here for good. You will be, she said ominously, straightening. Start marching down to the water. Why? The tide's going out. You'll go with it. Suppose I suggest we work together. She laughed scornfully. Move, quickly, Tachnon. He walked slowly down the steps and into the faint moonlight. He moved ahead with a calm, leisurely tread. Behind him the girl laughed. You're part Klid, Rorik, a hybrid or a throwback. He failed to ask her why. I could feel affection for a Tachnon, but I couldn't love one. I've watched you. You're part Klid. I can feel it. He wondered why his throat constricted. He said nothing. I love you, Rorik, Damn your hide! But she loved her planet more. What are you going to do about Larwich now? He asked coldly. Are you going to switch to someone else, or are you going to keep on brazening it out? Switch! I'm through with him. He's on the right course. Rorik started wading into shallow water. Go on out past the breakers, she called. I don't want you to wash back in. Glad to oblige, he grunted, but he paused to look back. She had kicked off her sandals and was wading after him. She stopped, gun glinting in the moonlight. Well, one thing. He scanned for her mind, but she blocked, refusing him resonance. He bludgeoned through until he made a strong but fuzzy contact. He held the contact, but turned away and began wading through the gentle rush of breakers while he wandered through his associative circuits concerning her. Stop it, Rorik! Then the resonance was complete, and he chuckled, because she was going to feel it when she shot him. Beyond the breakers, he turned again to face her. She was reeling dizzily, holding the gun at arm's length, and with her left hand pressed tight to her face. He was unprepared for the shots when they came. 2 went wide, but the third seared his chest, and he went down, fighting for air, hearing a choking scream from Klia. He gasped once and went under, swimming weakly for deeper water. Another bullet streaked phosphorescence through the blackness about him. He drove still deeper, clinging precariously to consciousness. Another slug streaked under him, and he veered upward. 7 cartridges in the gun, 5 gone. If he could only live a little longer. Then he had to rise for air. He spun around and came up slowly, facing shore. She was walking dejectedly back across the beach toward his cottage. He waited for her to look back. He dog-paddled with the waves, but the tide seemed to be sweeping him out. Pratav, blood and Klia, he choked in their native tongue. For the love of man! She heard him. She turned slowly, watched him coldly for a moment, pistol lifted high. Pratav, Klidin Taknon, came her icy paraphrase. The gun barked and barked again. 7. But this time it was his abdomen, and he heard himself screaming as he fought toward shore. He could only partially control the flow of blood to the wounds. When tissue cried for blood, the unconscious reflex let it go. It was like holding one's breath, and occasionally he had to bleed. She was standing there watching him, white in the moonlight, locked in a kind of trance. Go, he thought at her savagely. When I get there, I'll kill you for those last 2 shots. She looked at the gun in her hand. She let it drop, stared down at it, wiped the hand distastefully on her shorts. She backed away a step, stumbled in the sand, and sat down, rolling her head on her knees. He groped for her mind, and she erected no block. She hoped he would die before he got to shore, but she wasn't going to move. Fate, about to be satisfied, it gave him angry strength. A breaker washed over him from behind, and he rode with it briefly. When it passed him by and dropped him, he stood chest-deep, wading shoreward. He peered at her dazedly, hands clenching and unclenching in anticipation. He let her feel the strength of his hatred, but her thoughts were wandering. Her home, her people. But she saw them differently somehow, as if she were no longer capable of being guided by their values. Her effective framework had collapsed. She sat in a bewildered daze. He staggered from the water and fell to his knees on the sand. He crawled toward her with savage deliberation in the moonlight. Run, Klia. I'm going to kill you. She looked up slowly, watched him crawling toward her. Then she pulled herself up and went to meet him. Snarling, he lurched for her. Let me get you to a doctor, she said. He laughed, groped for her. She slipped her shoulders under his arm to support him. His fist cracked savagely. Something brittle shattered. She screamed and pawed at her face. He hit her again and again, rolling across the sand, battering her face until his fists were driving into wet pulp. "My eyes! My eyes!" Weakly, he crouched over her, staring. She had been wearing contact lenses. The green irises had been stained on the glass to cover her gray ones. Now jagged slivers of glass protruded from under her eyelids. She rolled her head and moaned, trying to escape him. Flashlights were coming down the beach, and Doc Larwich was shouting frantically. Rorik backed away from the girl. She came to her feet and began running blindly, staggering toward a sand embankment. "Rorik!" The cry was plaintive. He moved drunkenly after her, groping for resonance, steering her toward the pathway around the cottage. His car loomed on the driveway. He guided her into it, followed her. The girl drove, watching the road through his eyes. "You're finished, Klia." There was only wildness and fright in her racing mind. "My eyes! My eyes! My eyes!" He let her alone, clinging precariously to consciousness and fighting internal hemorrhage. The glaring lights on the road dazed him, and the car weaved crazily as she used his dimming vision to guide her. He knew he had won. He had stopped her, for as in every paranoiac culture, loss of function or deformity was cause for shame and ridicule among the Klid. A blinded Klid, like a Kwakiutl tribesman or Zulu warrior, was disgraced and ashamed. The only recourse was death. Why didn't she accept it then? He was waiting for her to ram the car into a truck or bridge, but she drove as straight as his failing sight would allow. A sign on the road said, "Robert Honkler, physician and surgeon." He stared at the White House, and the girl pulled to the curb. "Get out!" she ordered, but left the engine running and stayed behind the wheel. So that was it. She brought him here, and now, blinded, she was going to plunge on. "Why?" he gasped. "Why? Help me. Pratalv Bladen, Rorik." She snapped with a sarcastic viciousness that masked her heart. "For love of man." He jerked the key from the ignition and fell across her to hold her in the car. His elbow pressed against the horn and held it down. "Let me go." "We'll work together, Klia. We'll get these people into space, and somehow we'll help your people." She laughed bitterly. "Help them? You never gave them a chance. When the feudal order collapsed, the Taknon and the Algun adapted themselves to technology, but you banished the Klid without letting them find a place in the new society. You hated them too much as your former tyrants." "A place? What place could a Klid administrators, coordinators, organizers? But you exiled us to a world without iron, condemned us to an eternal stone age. There is but one fundamental right of man, Taknon, the right to try. You denied it to us." Footsteps were coming down the walk, and gentle hands were dragging them out of the car. Came blackness. When he awoke, he expected to see iron bars or the walls of a hospital room. Instead, he was in his own home in the suburbs. He tried to move and groaned. Something rustled in the room. "Lie still," she said. He rolled his head weakly to look at her. She sat stiffly in a straight-backed chair by the window, morning sunlight playing in her hair. There was a bandage across her eyes. He groped for her mind and found the answer. She had helped the doctor forget that he had ever seen 3 bullet wounds and a pair of ruined eyes. "As soon as you're able to get up, I'll go," she said coldly. "No, you'll stay. We'll build ships. We'll get your people to a Ferris planet somehow, an uninhabited one. If they could build a civilization from scratch, they deserve it." She stood up and faced the window for a time, soaking in the warm sunlight, and he allowed her the privacy of her thoughts. "The right to try, even for a race of power grabbers. Pratalv Bladen, for the love of man. My eyes, she said dully. He said there's not much chance. There is a chance? She shrugged. We still have one pair. And he showed her herself through them, showed her herself with ever-increasing daring until she blushed crimson. But her hands reached out to him. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.